Now it's time to turn our attention to putting some decorative paper on the case. Now we know our tree is going to come in over here and be about like that. And layer one of the leaves, leaves one, will come in about like that. So you can see what area we have to work with here. And what I'm thinking about, I've reserved from the 8x8 pad 2 sheets of the Seed Fairy paper, and I'm thinking that this will go on the front and the back. And it's okay that it's not tall enough because, as you saw a minute ago, those leaves come down a little bit. And then I want to create a little bit of a scene here. And I think what I'll do is I'll use the doorway from the Secret Garden here. I've reserved 1 sheet of the 12x12 paper, and then probably cut out some of these flowers from the bottom to make just a little arrangement of flowers that comes behind the trees here. And then I'll get that done on the front cover of the case, and then we'll turn our attention to the back cover. So let me do a little fussy cutting here, and I'll be back and we can look at that arrangement and then move on from there. As you can see, I've done a lot of fussy cutting of different parts and pieces from that one main sheet of the Secret Garden paper. I'm going to reserve this. I don't know if I'll need it, but I'll put that to the side. Now what I'm thinking about is that on the back side of the slipcase I'll use this fence, and so I'm just going to put them to the side. And then on the front I'm going to make a little scene with my doorway to the Secret Garden and all of these flowers. I also took my piece of 8x8 Secret Garden, I think this is Seed Fairy paper, and I cut out off a strip that's 2 1/4 inches wide. I don't need that and for the front of the case, and I'm going to reserve that in case I'd like to put that on the edge of the piece of the box that comes sliding out. So let's put that to the side, and let's start looking at our front scene here. So what I'm thinking about is something, you can see, I hope that I've kind of, I didn't want a straight edge right there for the edge, so I took and cut the flowers back a little bit. And I'm holding this back about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom, and I would say any straight parts on this edge are about 1/8 of an inch back. And then there's a line that I've marked on the case where the edge of the trunk comes, and I'm just making sure that my paper is about 1/2 an inch or so back, so it will go underneath the tree trunk. And then I'll probably need to pull in my tree to see exactly where these flowers need to go. Now obviously there's some holes here that I need to make sure I patch with a flower from where I cut out the fence. Something, you know, about like this. Then I'll bring in some of the, in order to cover up the fence part, some of these other flowers that I've cut out. And I think that will work. Let me bring in the tree. So I think that will work nicely for the front of the case. So I'm going to attach those parts and then take a look at the back of the case. I've finished adding the pattern paper to the front of the case. You can see I have here the door to the Secret Garden. I've added some of the flowers that we looked at, and then I raised up with some pop dots just a few little daisies and flowers in this corner. So that's the front cover, and now let's look at the back cover. Here again, I'm using the Seed Fairy paper, and then I've built a little scene with the fence cutout that I showed you before, and then I added, cut out the bow and some of the little purple flowers, some more of the daisies, and a little strip of daisies I found from somewhere that I can tuck right behind the root of the tree. And I've also raised up some of these items with pop dots just to give a little relief to the scene. And so we're going to just add that on here to the back, and then that will be the pattern paper on the cover. So I'll do that, and then we'll be back to look at the next part. Our next step is going to be to add the tree to the slipcase. And before we do that, there's a couple little prep items that we want to do. And the first thing is to darken the edge of this knot hole on the slipcase. And I'm just taking my marker around the inside of that hole and just kind of going around it. Oh, in case things don't line up perfectly and somebody was to peek inside there, they wouldn't see any raw chipboard. So I'm just taking a little marker around the edges. Doesn't have to be neat at all. So that's the little prep for the slipcase. And now for the tree, we're going to be putting some paper that has been embossed to look like bark on this tree, and the majority of that we will do once it's attached to the case. But it will be a lot easier to put the little strips on the edge of the two roots here. You can see I've kind of experimented with one over here, and we're going to do that before we add it on to the case. So what I have here is a little strip of paper that I've embossed using this Spellbinders Bricks and Bark die. And this is kind of an interesting die. I'm sorry, it's not a die, it's an embossing folder. Because on one side it has bricks, and on the other side it has bark. I don't know if you can see that in the light or not, but what happens when you emboss with the bark side, then obviously you get bark, and this is it just on the craft cardstock to begin with. There's a lot of texture, I don't think you can see it showing up, but then I went and inked it with just several colors of distress ink to bring out the bark texture in it. And that's what we're going to use to put on our tree. And we'll start with putting some little 1/4-inch strips right along the edges of these two roots. So I'm going to accomplish that, and then we'll be back to see what's next. So I finished adding the little 1/4 inch strips of bark to this top edge of the root on both the front and the back, and I've allowed it to come up on the side here. Oh, it's probably coming 3/8 to a 1/2 inch up, and then I made sure I creased really well in that little bend in the root there. And it comes on the bottom about I would say about 1 inch or so, just so it won't be coming off, and that's burnished down there real well. So now we're ready to attach the tree to the case, and we're going to do this in a couple of stages. The first thing we're going to do is just glue the central part here, trunk D, by putting glue around each of these little boxes in the central part. And you can see I've laid down some protective paper here, and I'm also going to get a wet wipe just in case I need to clean up after myself. Okay, there's my wet wipe. So see if my glue, yep, there's my glue going. Just going on these edges here. Okay, so we want to add this in the upright position so that the bottom edges stay nicely aligned with the bottom surface. And I am just standing up to get a good look at this and make sure it's coming around evenly. And that's looking good. Everybody is aligned, everybody is straight. And now I'm just going to hold some pressure on this side here. You can put a couple rubber bands around it. I think I'll do that as soon as I cut the cameras because they're not sitting right here. I should have thought about that. Put a couple rubber bands and allow that to dry thoroughly before proceeding. Now that the glue on the spine portion of the trunk has dried, we can proceed to gluing the front and back sections. And what I'm going to do here is again glue on the 4 little squares, put glue on the root that sticks out here. Make sure I have glue at this point and then up here at the top. I'm not going to try to put glue along this edge. I think if I have the top secured, all of the rest of this secured, that will be sufficient. Then I won't run the risk of making a glue mess on the pattern paper here, and I think that will be sufficient. I probably will do this in 2 stages. I'll put the front on, allow that to dry, and then put the back on. So I'll be back when that has completely dried so we can move on to our next step. So our glue is now all set up and the tree is firmly attached to the case, and you may recall that when we were doing the finishing around the tree, I said we would wait to finish this edge until we had it attached to the case. So now it's attached to the case, so let's get this edge finished. And so I have a piece of chocolate brown cardstock that's 1 3/8, it's scored at 3/8, that I'm going to use to wrap around this area. And I think it's, let's see, it's about 5 inches long. I think that'll be a gracious plenty. So I'm just removing the backing from the 3/8 inch side. And I'm going to start on the front edge here and just line that corner up with the corner that we already have on there. And just give that a good little burnish to keep it in place while we move around. So now we're just going to wrap around, keeping that edge that edge aligned till we get down here to the end. And I think I'll take my backing and just put it back on here for a second. Well, this isn't it, but it'll do. So I can see where I want to cut this off to make this meet here. And you remember we added our insurance with the marker there so that if we don't get this exactly right, we will have, it won't show. So I'm just tried it once. Can come off just a hair more. It's always best to cut it a little bit long to begin with and then come back and give it a cut. And now get this backing off and fit that right together there. Now we'll give that a good burnish all the way around here. So now we're going to wrap this around to the bottom. I'm just going to pull off score tape backing here. And we'll make some relief cuts at each one of these connection points. And then we can just wrap these to the bottom. I'm going to start by wrapping the two small ones, and then the next one's in line. And finally this one in the center. And give that a good burnish. Now if you want to, you can come in and finish off this bottom with a piece of brown cardstock or something nice to finish that off. The other place we want to finish is just to put some brown cardstock around the knot hole. And I have here a piece of a chocolate brown cardstock that's cut 2 inches by 2.5, and then I've cut a 1-inch circle here in the middle. You might recall that that's the diameter of this circle here, and I backed this whole piece with score tape. So I'm just removing the backing, and I find it easiest to get this aligned by, remember when we were working on this before that this hole was the same size as a bottle of alcohol ink? Well, you can use that to your advantage. Of course, you're making sure that cap is on tight, to get it lined up there by just pushing that in. And now you can get this chocolate cardstock aligned perfectly with your hole. And we'll give that a burnish. And then we'll just burnish on these bends here so that that gets wrapped around. And that finishes off our knot hole really nicely. So now I'm going to get some bark paper prepared, and we'll be back to work on the bark.